Hi, I'm Jeanette Roche. This is Bridge City News. Here are some of the top stories we've been following. Canada and U.S. officially in a trade war after Trump implements 25% tariffs on Canadian goods. Canada retaliates with 25% tariffs on $30 billion worth of U.S. products. Plus, Liberals choose their new leader this weekend, but political columnist Brian Lilley says Trudeau may remain PM for a time. We have details. And we speak with professional bull rider Nick Tetz, who won his 5th straight PBR event in the city.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Jeanette Roche.
Thanks so much for joining us. Canada and the U.S. are now in a trade war. The 25% U.S. tariffs on Canadian and Mexican exports to the United States officially went into effect at midnight Eastern Time. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says U.S. President Donald Trump has launched this continental trade war by imposing these economically devastating tariffs on the two countries. Canada is immediately imposing a 25% retaliatory tariff on $30 billion worth of American products, including booze, clothing, meat, dairy, eggs, and other groceries and products. These retaliatory tariffs will expand to cover another $125 billion in 21 days.
Our tariffs will remain in place until the U.S. tariffs are withdrawn, and not a moment sooner. And should these tariffs not cease, we are in active and ongoing discussions with provinces and territories to pursue several non-tariff measures which will demonstrate that there are no winners in a trade war. Now, it's not in my habit to agree with the Wall Street Journal, but Donald, they point out that even though you're a very smart guy, this is a very dumb thing to do.
In an online post today, Donald Trump said that if companies move to the U.S., there will be no tariffs. Trump has previously threatened to absorb Canada through, quote, economic force. And speaking to the media late Monday, Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly called the tariffs an existential threat to Canada.
We know that this is an existential threat to us, and there are thousands of jobs in Canada at stake.
Federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre also responding to the tariffs with a message directed straight at the president.
President Trump stabbed America's best friend in the back. My message to the president is this: Canada will fight back. We will defend our people and our economy, and we will put Canada first. There's no doubt that our economy will suffer, but so will yours, President Trump. In fact, you're already paying the price, with trillions of dollars erased in stock market value over the last month of these threats. Already, Americans are paying higher gas prices, as at midnight, a new American gas tax kicked in on U.S. working-class taxpayers and motorists. Your workers will soon start losing jobs they had upgrading Canadian raw materials, which, by the way, you were getting at an incredible and ridiculous bargain. And your businesses will be selling fewer products to your closest neighbor. And that's only the beginning.
Poilievre says Canada needs to retaliate against American tariffs by targeting U.S. goods Canada can make, does not need, or can obtain elsewhere. He says almost all money collected from counter tariffs should go to tax cuts, with a small sum set aside for the workers hit hardest by the trade war. Ontario Premier Doug Ford says his province is ripping up its contract with Elon Musk's SpaceX to provide Starlink internet services to remote areas. He says it's done and gone after the U.S. hit Canada with 25% across-the-board tariffs with a lower 10% levy on Canadian energy. He also says Ontario will ban American companies from $30 billion worth of procurement contracts and eradicate U.S. booze in its first wave of retaliations against the U.S.
Starting today, LCBO, the largest purchaser of alcohol in the world, will begin removing U.S. products from its store shelves. Also, starting today, all U.S.-based companies will be banned from taking part in government procurement. Every year, the province and its agencies spend about $30 billion on procurement. alongside our more than $200 billion plan to build infrastructure. U.S.-based businesses will now lose out on tens of billions of dollars in revenues.
In addition to Ontario and Manitoba removing U.S. products from liquor stores, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith says oil and gas producers in the province will have to look at ways to send more to global markets outside of the United States. In the midst of all of this tariff talk, there is a leadership race going on, and there's talk around some of the water coolers in Ottawa that Justin Trudeau's reign as Prime Minister might not be coming to an end after the Liberal Party chooses its new leader this weekend. Political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley explains.
One of the things that I've heard lately is that Trudeau may stay on and allow Carney just to focus on an election campaign as Liberal leader. You know, Trudeau stay as PM. I don't know how that would work, but this is, I'm told, part of the discussion in the Prime Minister's office. I'm also hearing an election call by March 16th, so a week after the Liberal leadership. They'll call an election. Voting would happen just after Easter. So Easter is April 20th this year. Easter Monday is technically a stat holiday, according to the federal government. So bureaucrats won't be working. That means you can't hold the election that day. It's got to be April 22nd. So watch for that. I'm not saying it's going to happen for sure, but these are some of the discussions happening in Ottawa. Is Carney just focusing on an election campaign, Trudeau remaining PM, but an election call March 16th for a voting day of April 22nd.
You can catch my full interview with Brian Lilley coming up after Business News. Natural Resources Minister Jonathan Wilkinson says Ottawa is extending a tax break for those investing in critical mineral exploration. He says the 15% tax cut is being extended for 2 more years and is expected to free up $110 million to help develop mining sites, primarily in the north. Critical minerals have become a leading political issue in recent weeks after President Trump's repeated calls for Canada to become the 51st state. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was caught on a hot mic last month saying Trump's threat was, quote, a real thing tied to his administration's desire to access Canada's critical minerals. And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says he regrets the meltdown meeting he had in the Oval Office last week. He said in a post on X Tuesday, quote, it is time to make things right. We would like future cooperation and communication to be constructive, adding his country is ready to work fast to end the war. Last week, a meeting at the White House between President Trump, Vice President J.D. Vance, and the Ukrainian leader escalated into a shouting match in front of the press. Back on Canadian soil, the tariffs will also have an effect on smaller local businesses. The Lethbridge Chamber of Commerce reacted to the newly implemented tariffs on Tuesday in connection with other chambers and businesses in the United States. The CEO of the Lethbridge Chamber says the consensus is that tariffs are dangerous.
The U.S. Chamber of Commerce released a statement today about urges swift end to tariffs set to go into effect. So this is one company in Wyoming. It's a Wyoming machinery. My company will feel an immediate detrimental impact as a result of these tariffs. So that is coming out of Wyoming. And then we have out of Kentucky. New tariffs on Canada and Mexico will put unnecessary pressure on Kentucky businesses and families. As a state that thrives on trade, we know firsthand how these policies disrupt supply chain, increase costs, and threaten jobs. I think it's really important to also showcase that American businesses are stepping up saying this is dangerous, just as Canadian businesses are stepping up and saying this is dangerous.
A study from the Canadian Chamber of Commerce lists Lethbridge to be the 10th most affected city in Canada from tariff impacts, with Calgary just up the road sitting at second. The Alberta Energy Regulator is officially concluding its hearing on the Grassy Mountain coal mining project. The AER witnessed closing arguments on Tuesday, and a decision on the project is expected by early June. Additionally, a protest gathered outside the regulator office in opposition to the project, citing environmental concerns. Lethbridge police are investigating a single vehicle collision that occurred earlier today, resulting in injuries to the driver. Just before 11 a.m., a Ford Mustang struck a traffic light standard in the center median along the 1500 block of Scenic Drive South. The vehicle and light standard sustained significant damage, and the 20-year-old male driver was transported by EMS to hospital with serious but non-life-threatening injuries. Excessive speed and poor road conditions contributed to the collision. The investigation is ongoing. Coaldale residents who use wheelchairs or walkers can now rely on a new handy bus to get around town or to get to medical appointments and shopping in Lethbridge. Tim Jansen, president with Coaldale and District Handy Ride Association, says the handy bus features an access ramp and winch system for safe and controlled entry, especially in winter conditions.
We provide transportation for a very vulnerable sector of the population. I will say that we've also looked at, can we provide transportation to broader sections of the population? The reality is that transportation is very expensive. It's probably the second or third most expensive item in most households. The reality is there are more and more people who can't afford their own means of transportation. Coaldale's commissioning of the Shift Recreation Center on the edge of town has also been a potential area where we could move people around within the town to ensure that they can enjoy all the facilities that are operated by the town.
Jansen says that around $222,000 was the contribution given by various institutions to buy the handy bus. Well, March is the Alberta Francophony Month, according to Tanya Furr, Minister of Arts, Culture and Status of Women. French is the second most spoken language in Alberta, with over 260,000 who either speak it as their mother tongue or use it at home. She says their role in enriching our culture, fostering economic development, and strengthening diversity is invaluable. And for his part, Nate Glubish, Minister of Technology and Innovation and Francophone Community Liaison, said in a statement, quote, Alberta's Francophones have made and continue to make invaluable contributions to our province. Let us celebrate their legacy and work towards a future that embraces and celebrates bilingualism. BCN chatted with Mylene Beaulieu, Regional Director with ACFA, an organization that represents Alberta's Francophone community. She says the community of Francophones is growing in our province.
We have seen a growth in Francophone people coming in Alberta lately. We are more than happy to welcome people. We have been growing the community. We are able to give newcomers jobs in French, their modern language. So it's very important to us that we can provide those services. And for the people who comes and only speak French, then we offer opportunity to mingle, to have social interactions, and we propels them to have a good sense of a job, give them a sense of community, put the kids into school. We have Francophone school, immersion schools that parents can choose whether they would put their kids into a Francophone school, an English school, or immersion school. And that's the beauty of our places. We offer everything.
Beaulieu says this Friday they will raise the Franco-Alberta flag at the La Cité des Prairies building, and they will have other activities throughout the month. Well, over the weekend, professional bull riding made its annual Cup Series return to Lethbridge. The winner of the championship on a Saturday, Nick Tetz, won his fifth straight PBR event in our city. He tells BCN that there's something to the city of Lethbridge that always brings out his best.
And it feels really good. You know, I was really lucky with my draws and the bulls that I was able to pick, and you know, I did my job, and I ended up having the highest aggregate score and ended up winning. So it's a building that I'm really comfortable in. Like, I've always done good, and every time I walk into that building, I always feel the best. And there's always a certain energy in the town of Lethbridge. It really seems like they really enjoy the PBR, especially when it comes to town, and hopefully we can make it 6. I don't know if we will, but definitely won't mind it. I feel really good about this season so far. You know, I've been going and getting on practice bulls and trying to stay sharp and stay at it. And I'm excited for the summer to kick off and get rolling with the crew.
Tets will be chasing his third national title this season, which is a feat that only one other rider, Aaron Roy, has accomplished. Wow. Well, the light blanket of snow we woke up to this morning in Lethbridge has quickly melted away thanks to the nice sunshine and a temperature that climbed close to 9 degrees today. But not so fast, says Mother Nature. More flurries could be headed our way. I'll be back with a full look at the forecast. Well, as I said just before the break there, we could be in for some more flurries just when we thought that white stuff was all behind us. But actually what we are looking at for Wednesday is a 60% chance of flurries or showers. So that's kind of what we're looking at with that precipitation. Also a nice high of 5 degrees. For the rest of the week, looking fairly clear and sunny and staking above those average temperatures for this time of year. So high of 6 degrees on Thursday and up all the way up to 9 there on Friday. We're hitting those double digits again on Saturday on the weekend there. Can't wait for that. So clear skies, 13 degrees on Saturday, up to a lovely 16 degrees on Sunday, and then 7 on Monday with mainly cloudy skies. Not too bad if I say so myself. So average high for this time of year, 4 degrees. Average low, -8. 18 was our record high on this day. That happened back in 1931 in Lethbridge. And 1955 saw Lethbridge's coldest day on record, which was -31. This morning, the sun rose at 7:08, and our sun is going to bed tonight at 6:19 p.m. So we're now at 11 hours, 11 minutes of daylight today. On the west coast, 30% chance of flurries in the morning in both Victoria and Vancouver. Victoria sitting at 9 tomorrow, 10 degrees for the high in Vancouver. Edmonton, clear skies, high of 3 degrees, 3 for the high also in Calgary with a mix of sun and cloud. Now as we look into the rest of the prairies here, Saskatoon seeing a high of -1 with a mix of sun and cloud, also -1 there in Regina. 30% chance of flurries expected there though, and in Winnipeg a high of 0 degrees. Now as we get into the central part of the country there, Toronto seeing showers and drizzle, but here's the thing, up to 22 millimeters of rain is expected there in Toronto. Also could see a possibility of a late day thunderstorm there. 7 for the high, 5 for the expected high in Ottawa tomorrow. Ottawa expecting 5 millimeters of rain, could see some freezing rain attached to that as well, and then 5 to 10 millimeters expected in Toronto there with 5 for the high there as well. As we let's look over to Atlantic Canada here, over in the Maritimes. What are we seeing for Fredericton? Well, Fredericton is coming in at 3 degrees, could see a 60% chance of flurries, also a 60% chance in Halifax there. Could see some showers with that as well. 7 for the high, 3 the expected high tomorrow in Charlottetown with a mix of rain and showers. And then in St. John's could see some flurries with a high of 0. So there you have it. That is your forecast. Canadian Home Builders Association CEO Kevin Lee says U.S. tariffs levied on Canada will have a muted impact on their own, but Canadians should still expect home construction to slow. He says a slowing economy and weaker housing market tied to the tariffs could drag down the pace of housing starts, while counter tariffs from Canada could drive up construction costs.
We are very concerned about the U.S. tariffs and certainly condemn the direction President Trump is taking, which will affect Canada, but will also drive up construction costs even more in the United States. While the U.S. tariffs of 25% on Canada will be problematic, they in and of themselves will have muted effect on construction costs here in Canada. What will affect our market more will be our own counter tariffs and, most importantly, the impact the U.S. tariffs will have on our overall economy, which in turn will affect housing starts. It's usually job insecurity or loss of jobs that really cause a slowdown that in turn translates to changes in housing starts. But the other big challenge, too, is some of these impacts are already starting to happen because of loss of consumer confidence. So even before markets start to change and prices start to go up, people feel uncertain and therefore less interested in making those kinds of investments. So there are a lot of variables. They're probably already sneaking into the market now, and we still have a bit of a slow market despite the fact interest rates are coming down, and we would expect that'll continue to worsen as the trade war continues, if it does.
Now here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was down 429 points on the day to finish at 24,572. The Dow was down 670 points to 42,520. The S&P 500 was down 71 to 5778, and the Nasdaq was down 65 points to finish at 18,285. West Texas Intermediate oil was down 29 cents to 68.08 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 17 cents to 4.30 US. Gold was up 26.79 to 29.1755 US an ounce, and silver was up 32 cents to 31.97 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.57 per bushel, barley is at $6.53, canola is at $14.08, and corn is at $8 per bushel. Live cattle April contract was up $2.40 to $194.65. Feeder cattle were down 18 cents to $273.85. Lean hogs April contract was down $1.35 to $82.35. And the Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to 69.50 US.
Recapping one of our top stories today, Canada and the U.S. are now officially in a trade war. The 25% U.S. tariffs on Canadian and Mexican exports to the United States officially went into effect at midnight Eastern Time. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says U.S. President Donald Trump has launched this continental trade war by imposing these economically devastating tariffs on the two countries. Canada is immediately imposing 25% retaliatory tariffs on $30 billion worth of American products and will expand to cover another $125 billion in 21 days. Coming up after the break, as the trade war between Canada and the United States gets underway, political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley weighed in with his thoughts. He says it's very uncertain how long these tariffs will be around for. Also, when you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. You can also visit our website or our YouTube page anytime to check out more of our stories and interviews. U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs have officially come into effect as of today. Also, by this weekend, the Liberals will have chosen their new leader, meaning we'll soon have a new prime minister. And here to talk about all of this is political columnist Brian Lilley of the Toronto Sun. Brian, welcome. The tariffs are finally here. What does this mean for Canada?
It means a world of hurt if they stick around, if they stay in place for any length of time. Look, if it's short term, if it's only a couple of weeks, then I'm sure that economically we'll figure out a way around it. But 25% tariffs on just about every Canadian export to the United States other than energy, so that would include electricity and oil, is my understanding. We'll have to, sort out the details on that. Energy's only getting a 10% tariff. This is going to be devastating if these stay in place for any length of time. I've talked to people across various industries, and they're like, well, a 10% tariff, if that's what we were dealing with, well, we could adjust. The dollar's gone down a little bit. That helps. We can eat a little bit of it. You can raise prices just a little bit, and that covers off the 10%. A couple points on the dollar, a couple points eaten by the person selling, and a couple of points of increased price, and you're at 10%. But 25, that's difficult to overcome. And so we are looking at potential shutdown of things like auto plants, a lot of manufacturers across the country. Look, the auto sector is concentrated in Ontario, and it's highly integrated with what we see in Ohio and Detroit and elsewhere, Indiana, places where the Americans make parts and automobiles. We trade parts back and forth. But manufacturing across the country is also deeply integrated with the United States. There are parts of what goes into Red Bull that are developed in British Columbia and shipped down for processing into the Red Bull drink in the United States. And then we bottle it or can it, Red Bull sold in cans, in Canada. Well, the aluminum for those cans comes from Quebec, but we don't make can sheet. That's what you make a can out of. It's the aluminum. It's turned into sheets and then rolled and turned into cans. We don't make the can sheet in Canada, but we make cans in Canada. And so it's a completely integrated economy. This is going to cause massive problems on both sides of the border, but a bigger problem for us. Doesn't matter what the prime minister or any premier tells you, we are going to feel the pain harder than the Americans will.
Wow, and people are just freaking out. And you'd mentioned the 10% tariff on Canadian oil, and most of that is from Alberta. So should Alberta take this as a win, thanks to what Premier Danielle Smith was able to do?
Look, in a trade war, there's no winners, and a 10% tariff is still bad. It's not as bad. So in some ways, yes, but overall, this is just bad for the Alberta economy. It's bad for the Canadian economy. Western Canadian Select, which is what most Canadian oil sold into the United States, that's what it's labeled as. That's what the price is. Generally sells at about an 18 to 20% discount on West Texas Intermediate, which is the benchmark in North America. In other parts of the world, they use Brent crude. In North America, we use West Texas Intermediate. When you hear the cost, when you hear that oil is at such and such a price, it's West Texas Intermediate. Western Canadian Select, as I said, sells at about an 18 to 20% discount generally. Having 10% added on still makes it more affordable. And that's in part because we don't have pipelines to Tidewater, so we're forced to sell at a discount to the US. So it's still going to be something that the Americans will buy, but it will hurt the industry. It will hurt producers. What the impact will be on jobs, we'll have to wait and see. It's not going to be as quick as the auto sector, let's say, where we could see plants on both sides of the border shutting down within a week.
Horrifying, absolutely. Now, Brian, you're in Ontario, and in Ontario, Premier Doug Ford made headlines stateside with a couple of moves. So he's making it so that all American booze is now off the shelf in Ontario liquor stores, and he's threatening to cut off the electricity supply. So can Ford actually do this?
On both accounts, yes. Okay. And the American booze is already coming off the shelves. So, in Alberta, you have private liquor stores, but the government is the wholesaler. In Ontario, the government is the wholesaler for liquor and the retailer. Now, we have private beer and wine sales, but not private liquor sales. So, Doug Ford is really pushing that he's taking Kentucky bourbon off the shelves, along with California wine and Tito's handmade vodka out of Texas. And that is really annoying the governors and the senators and so on down in the United States. Now, so let's take the example of Kentucky bourbon. Well, the governor is a Democrat. That doesn't help you with Donald Trump. The senior senator is Mitch McConnell, who Trump hates. But Rand Paul is the junior senator from Kentucky. He doesn't like this either. And he's not all in on Trump world, but he's aligned with them on many things, works with them on many things. And he is in the middle of saying the tariffs on Canada don't make sense. This is what we need, whether it's Rand Paul or conservative media commentators like Ben Shapiro. We need Republicans, conservatives in the United States to speak up. So Ontario buys more than $1 billion worth of booze from the Americans every single year. All those future contracts shut down. The current stuff is being taken off the shelves. It'll be warehoused. If they can sell it later on down the road when the tariffs are gone, they will. If not, the government's willing to eat the cost. Nova Scotia is doing the same. British Columbia has said that they will take off alcohol from red states. I don't know if that's because David Eby likes his California Chardonnay or, why he's not taking it all off. I don't understand. Ford is asking every premier, every liquor board across the country to do the same thing. On electricity, I have to say, since November 25th, when Donald Trump first proposed this, and when he was talking about Canada being the 51st state, there hasn't been a lot that has broken through in American media until this. Ontario sells electricity to states like New York, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and he said, look, I will cut your electricity and I'll do it with a smile on my face. Now, that's not his opening position, but it is getting noticed, and not just on CNN, where Trump was, on TV, or on NBC, where he appeared. American conservative and Republican commentators are noticing this. They're commenting on it. They're saying, some are saying, this is why we should just annex Canada and take it over. Others are saying, ooh, this is bad. But at least they're noticing very little of what we've been talking about, threatening in response to the Trump tariffs has broken through until Ford said, let's cut off their electricity. Now, what they're actually going to do is start with a tariff on an export tariff, increasing the price between 10 and 25%. It'll depend on what they charge us, and then they'll go from there. But Ford was just saying earlier today, he'll start it there, but by mid-April, he's willing to just cut it off. And that means they've got to find it elsewhere, which will cost them more because that electricity will not be in the open market anymore.
Do you think this is just a temporary thing, Brian? Do you think this will go on and on?
It's difficult to tell. Look, Donald Trump truly believes in tariffs. The people around him believe in tariffs. They are upping the rhetoric. Howard Lutnick, his commerce secretary, who is a very smart man, very successful man, someone who I've been watching to try and understand what they're doing here. Howard Lutnick went on American television and said, oh, okay, Canada exports so much to us, but they import very little from us. So they need these tariffs. No, outside of oil, it's a very balanced trading relationship. And even with oil, it's only a $63 billion a year trade deficit. But they are making it out to be so much more. There is a push to say, let's revamp the way the American economy works, get rid of income tax, bring in tariffs to pay for everything. Well, if that's the way it's going to go, that's going to require a complete revamp of our own economy because we've become too reliant on the United States. We are more reliant on exports to the United States than we were on exports to the British Empire at the height of the empire more than a century ago in the Victorian era. So we will have to completely revamp our economy if this sticks around. If they start changing the way that government functions in the United States, if they start gutting income taxes to rely on tariff income, then that means it's not going away. And we're going to have to make decisions on our side, decisions that outside of someone like Pierre Poilievre, I'm not sure most Canadian politicians are ready to contemplate.
Right. Now, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau responded to the tariff situation today, and he's about to be replaced by Mark Carney, but he still came out to address the situation. So what did he have to say, Brian?
Well, on the one hand, he was very strong. He questioned why the United States is attacking Canada while cozying up to Vladimir Putin and Russia. And that's a valid question. Look, I don't buy into everything on the narrative about Putin or Ukraine or what Trump is trying to do on there. I think there's a lot of people trying to push their own ideological or political agenda on that. But saying nice things about Putin while saying horrible things about Canada and launching a trade war makes zero sense to anybody. It's, as I said, even Americans, Rand Paul, Ben Shapiro, et cetera, people are coming out and saying, this doesn't make sense to me. So Trudeau was very strong in saying that we'll stand firm and we'll strike back, but he's not in office very long. He is a lame duck. He's also part of the reason that we're in this mess. The fact that Justin Trudeau and Donald Trump hate each other so much is part of why we are in the crosshairs. There are valid reasons for some of the tariffs on Mexico, very valid reasons for tariffs on China, less so on Canada. Do they have trade irritants with us? Absolutely, just as we do with them. But none of this makes sense. But Trump and Trudeau hate each other. That's where we're at. We will have a new prime minister in a little bit. What will that mean in terms of this relationship? It's too difficult to say at this point.
Right. I've been actually hearing that people are directing their anger at the wrong person, that they should be mad at Trudeau, not Trump, about all this whole thing.
Well, look, I think you should be angry at both of them. Justin Trudeau has left our economy in a very bad position. You don't have to take my word for it. Take Mark Carney's word for it. He described the Canadian economy as being very weak. despite the Liberal government saying we're the best in the G7, Mark Carney in the Liberal leadership debates last week said Canada's economy is weak. But, as much as we're in this partly because Trudeau and Trump hate each other, these are the actions of Donald Trump. These are the actions of the American president. So, Trudeau can't wear all of this. As much as I am a harsh critic of him, at the end of the day, this comes down to Trump deciding he's going to make these moves.
Okay, so speaking of Trudeau, I guess passing the torch, or so it may be here, Mark Carney will likely become elected Liberal leader this weekend by extension, becoming our prime minister. Does that take place immediately? Is there sort of a handing off period? Is it kind of unclear at this point?
It's funny you ask because Trudeau was asked about that at his news conference on the tariffs, and he said that will be a discussion between himself and whoever wins the Liberal leadership. We're all assuming it's going to be Mark Carney, and that they'll have a discussion on that. One of the things that I've heard lately is that Trudeau may stay on and allow Carney just to focus on an election campaign as Liberal leader. Trudeau stay as PM. I don't know how that would work, but this is, I'm told, part of the discussion in the Prime Minister's office. I'm also hearing an election call by March 16th, so a week after the Liberal leadership. They'll call an election. Voting would happen just after Easter. So Easter is April 20th this year. Easter Monday is technically a stat holiday, according to the federal government. So bureaucrats won't be working. That means you can't hold the election that day. It's got to be April 22nd. So watch for that. I'm not saying it's going to happen for sure, but these are some of the discussions happening in Ottawa. Is Carney just focusing on an election campaign, Trudeau remaining PM, but an election call March 16th for a voting day of April 22nd.
Okay, and then speaking of Carney, Brian, you've obviously been pointing to several examples of him not exactly telling the truth, or in your words, outright lying. So what are some of the problems, in a nutshell, that you've seen with Carney?
Yeah, you're not allowed to say that someone's lying in Parliament. So you'll often see people come up with, oh, he's not familiar with the commandments, meaning that they're not being truthful. Look, Carney has claimed that he helped balance the budget under Paul Martin, which he didn't do. He didn't work for Paul Martin. He didn't join the federal government until 2004 when Martin was PM, and 6 years after he balanced the budget. He's taking credit for Canada's response to the 2008-2009 financial crisis. Stephen Harper recently wrote an open letter saying he's taking credit for Jim Flaherty's work, and Jim Flaherty is long past and not around to defend himself. He claimed that Canada sells the United States almost all of their semiconductors, the computer chips that they rely on. We're less than 1% of all sales into the United States. On and on it goes. I mean, it's resulted in people claiming that Carney was a Roman emperor, that he was the first man in space, all these things, because he keeps claiming things, claiming credit for things that aren't true. And then when it comes to moving the headquarters of Brookfield Asset Management to New York City from Toronto, he claims he had nothing to do with it, except he did. He voted as chair of the board to make the move. So Mark Carney, he's not really familiar with the truth.
We are out of time here, but Toronto Sun political columnist Brian Lilley, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Canada continues to wrestle with how best to respond to the threat of 25% tariffs from the U.S. So exactly how do tariffs work, and how will they affect our bottom line? Well, today's guest will sort some of this out for us, as we're joined by Dr. Danny Leroy. He is an associate professor of economics at the University of Lethbridge. Welcome, Dr. Leroy. Great to have you with us today.
It's great to be here, Jeanette. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so this is such a timely topic. Everyone's talking tariffs these days. So why don't we start with a bit of an overall explanation, almost like a tariffs 101 course. What exactly are tariffs, and how do they work, practically speaking?
That's an excellent question. Tariffs are taxes, and they are taxes not on goods, but they're on people. Cigarettes don't pay taxes. Lumber doesn't pay taxes. Aluminum and steel don't pay taxes. Only people can be compelled to pay. So in this discussion with the consequence of Trump's tariffs, it's important to remember the people involved. And the people who are directly impacted first and foremost are those individuals in the United States who wish to buy products produced in Canada. And these are the people who are paying import taxes on those goods. It's individuals who are paying taxes on these imported goods.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So go ahead.
And one of the consequences of these taxes being put in place is that it makes it relatively more expensive for consumers in the United States to buy products produced in Canada because they are compelled to pay this import tax.
Right. Yeah.
And a consequence of paying a higher tax and paying higher prices is that they're going to substitute, perhaps, towards things that are relatively less expensive. And that might be something that's produced in the United States. It might be something that's produced not in Canada, not in Mexico, but from somewhere else in the world. So one of the impacts on Canadians and why Canadians should be concerned about this is that to the extent that buyers in the United States substitute away from buying goods produced by Canadians, revenues for sellers in Canada will fall. And these products, Jeanette, they don't vanish, but they will find their next best market, the next best available, capable buyer. And some of those buyers might be in Canada. So, for example, if there's a decrease in the amount of aluminum and steel that is purchased by Americans, and this aluminum and steel is produced in Canada, that there'll be more available for Canadians to purchase. So one of the maybe not intended, but the consequences of this is that these goods that have already been produced will find another market and they will be sold perhaps at a lower price. In the longer term, this is very important for businesses because the revenues that they can make from selling to the buyers in the United States, these are circumscribed, and they can only use their resources in a less profitable and productive way. Now, some of these businesses might decide to produce less. They might decide to hire fewer people, generate less output, and generate smaller revenues. So the reason why these Trump tariffs are of concern to Canadians, it's not that President Trump can tax Canadians. The only people he's capable of harming are his own citizens, the importers in the United States. But it's the response of those importers that has consequences for Canadians.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Well, okay, so when a Canadian company exports a product to the U.S., who pays the tariff? It's the Americans?
It's the Americans who pay the import tax.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And it means that they're if the price in Canada, for example, is $100 US, and the buyer in the United States has to pay a 25% import tax on that, the cost to the buyer in the US becomes $125.
Okay, so who gets the money in all of this?
It is collected by the revenue agents in the United States. They're the ones that they're imposing this tax, and they are the ones that collect it.
So when leaders of nations place tariffs on other countries, like Trump is doing, what are they usually?
But they're not placing tariffs on other countries. They're placing taxes on their own citizens.
Yeah, but
right?
do you think that people are confused by this?
I think there is an important misunderstanding here, because Canadians don't pay U.S. import taxes. We suffer the consequences of individuals in the United States having to pay higher taxes, but we ourselves, I don't have to send any money to President Trump.
Right.
It's the citizen in the United States who's paying
Okay, I
these
think
import
that's the
taxes.
confusion. So what are these countries trying to usually accomplish? Is it just to make
Well,
money, or is the end goal to encourage their own citizens to buy local and to create
well,
more jobs this way?
that's one of the objectives is to encourage more domestic production. So, for example, on aluminum and steel, the fact that imports from Canada will be buyers in the United States will be taxed 25% beginning March 12th. This makes it possible for firms who produce aluminum and steel in the United States to raise their prices a little bit. And it encourages other people to expand production and enter these industries. However, one of the consequences of that is that these resources necessary for producing aluminum and steel in the United States have to come from somewhere, right? So they'll be bid away from current lines of production into the production of aluminum and steel, where they don't have a comparative advantage in producing this. They could get it less expensive from suppliers in Quebec.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So when President Trump has said that tariffs will make America rich again, is there any truth to that?
Overall, you cannot tax yourself to prosperity. Winston Churchill very famously made a parallel to standing in a bucket and trying to lift yourself up. It just doesn't work, right? You can't tax your way to prosperity. Now, one of the consequences of these tariffs is that it redistributes some of the existing wealth from those individuals who are now paying the taxes to those who benefit from that protection. So it doesn't make America wealthier overall, but the benefits and costs are easily identifiable, and the individuals who benefit and those who must pay are also easily seen.
Yeah. Okay. So it's going to clearly hurt the United States.
It's going to hurt some of the people. It's hurting some of the people, right? We need to remember the people involved. The United States can't hurt anybody, right? It's a geopolitical region. It's individuals, economics and tariffs, and this concerns people. It's who we are. People are being taxed. People are being encouraged to substitute away from products produced by Canadians to products that are produced in the United States. And part of the aim is to expand production of aluminum and steel.
Yeah. And I was just going to mention, so when we see 25% tariffs placed on aluminum for exports from Canada, which account for what, 60% of America's imports, so won't that impact businesses and consumers in America? Like their costs for aluminum are going to go up, and I'm guessing that they won't be able to build manufacturing plants anywhere fast enough to produce enough U.S. aluminum, right?
The longer the tariff is in place, the more damaging it becomes.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right, Jeanette, that in the short term, these buyers of aluminum and steel, it raises their cost structure. Anybody that's selling pop in cans, or they're using steel for erecting buildings, all of this is going to become more and more expensive in the United States. So it's a great example of how tariffs don't create prosperity. It raises the cost structure of anybody who's buying these imported goods from individuals in Canada.
Yeah. So what is Trump's end game here, in your opinion?
Well, I don't know. But the idea that somehow this is the source of prosperity, and that one can tax their way to affluence is a bit misplaced.
Yeah. If the tariffs were to be kept in place for an extended period of time, is it possible that some American steel producers would simply move their production to another country?
If the tariffs are in place, it's steel producers in other countries that might have the incentive to move to the United States, because the import tax gives them some protection insulates them from foreign competition. So one of the things that a tariff does, it brings industries that left the United States because they weren't competitive. Having a tariff in place brings them back. It provides them a larger potential profit, and it encourages, I guess the term would be reshoring some of these industries. But this comes at a huge cost, and it's net counterproductive.
Mm-hmm. And at present, the Canadian dollar is weak, which makes Canada attractive for investments. But could that have a positive impact in the tariff war?
I'm not so sure what the connection would be there. Mm-hmm. In terms of somebody deciding where to invest, whether it's in Canada or in the United States, there's a litany of factors beyond the purchasing power of the currency that would influence an entrepreneur. And among them would be the regulatory framework. It's not just import taxes, but taxes generally, business taxes, one carbon tax. In Canada, there's a long list of things that would cause a potential investor at least a moment of pause.
Right. How long do you think it will take for the American public to start protesting against the higher costs for consumers?
Well, it depends where the import taxes, who pays them, and the number of people who pay them, and how long the consequences are felt and how deeply they're felt. If there was an import tax put on Canadian oil and gas that's produced in Canada and exported to the United States, if it was at 25%, there would be a big reaction, because everybody's buying fuel. Energy is expensive, and Canadians are an important purveyor of oil and gas to consumers in the United States, and making those goods 25% more expensive than they currently are would impact a lot of people and cascade out just well beyond the price at the pump.
Yeah. Historically, how long do these kinds of tariff wars last, and who ends up being the winners and the losers in the end?
Well, there's no winners. In the long term, there's no winners. In the short term, we need to be very careful. You mentioned at the outset of the interview here, what should the response in Canada be? Mm-hmm. If in the United States, consumers are facing higher taxes on the goods, on products that they are importing, these people who are buying imports, if they're taxed at a higher rate, it does nothing to resolve that problem by taxing Canadians. How does taxing somebody or removing or preventing people from buying products resolve the problem?
Yeah.
Right? You know, if you take alcohol off the shelf, if you know that, or you tax some individuals in Canada who wish to buy products produced in the United States, this doesn't solve the problem. We're harming our own citizens by doing this. In fact, the appropriate response would be to recognize how damaging these taxes, these import taxes are, and then do what we can to remove any impediments that we have. We should be encouraging people to buy more, not only in Canada, but from everywhere in the world, to make it as easy as possible for the buyers and sellers to interact, to reduce the costs of transacting. Right? What makes people rich, Jeanette, is it's what they consume. Right? And if you make it more expensive to consume things, you don't make people wealthier, you make them poorer.
Yeah. Do you think it's possible that Trump is simply using the tariff threats as leverage, and perhaps the tariffs will never actually put into place?
Well, there might be something to that. That's a little beyond my professional wheelhouse. Yeah. But you see how one of the things that he has been able to do is that he certainly has Canadian politicians in a twist.
Yeah.
Sure right. And in terms of improving border security, my goodness, he's realized that objective at almost zero cost.
Yes. Yeah, it's pretty incredible.
It is. So rather than harming our own citizens by responding with creating import taxes of our own and enforcing them, right? Why don't we? The appropriate response might be to find ways to remove his ability to lever, right? So if we have some obligations at the border for security, maybe these obligations ought to be fulfilled. If there's import taxes in Canada that impede producers in the United States from satisfying the wants of Canadians, maybe these import taxes on Canadians should be removed, right? Just take that what's the fulcrum point on the lever? Take it away from them. Canada's open for business.
Yeah, exactly. We are unfortunately out of time here. It's such a huge topic, lots to unpack. But Dr. Leroy, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. I enjoyed it very much.
Dr. Danny Leroy is an associate professor of economics at the University of Lethbridge. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks so much for watching.